Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar on building an effective IEP. I'm Julie Tompkins. I'm a family navigator here at the ARC, and I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us virtually. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Karen Cooper, training specialist at FACT. Thank you, Karen.
Just a little bit about myself. My name is Karen Cooper. I work for Family Advocacy and Community Training. I've been there for about 15 years. I started as an educational advocate. So I did that the majority of my time, and about the last 5 years, I've been now providing trainings across the state, as well as locally, and training all of our employees. I have an adult son who is on the autism spectrum. He's 26 years old. I will be referring to him occasionally throughout this presentation. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to go over building an effective IEP. The first thing that you need to know is I'm not an attorney. I have had extensive training over the years on IDEA, but please do not construe any of this as legal advice or legal services. This is information to help you advocate for your child. So we're going to be looking at some of the regulations under IDEA and how they apply in developing the IEP. We're going to discuss the purpose behind IDEA and why that's important. Talk about how to prepare for the IEP meeting, look at all of the components of the IEP, what they mean and how they work, and do some, well, kind of do some activities as well as we can via Zoom. Just so you know, Form G, which I think many people are familiar with and nervous about, I did add some of that information into this presentation. I worked on that today. So I don't have everything, but I'm more than happy to answer questions regarding distance learning, alternative methods of instruction, and Form G. So I created this little cartoon called The Adventures of Mrs. Jones, and we have Jenny Jones as the mom, Mr. Smith, Sam Smith as the teacher, Mrs. Brown as special education teacher, Matt Miller as the principal, and then of course we have Johnny. And the reason I did this is I kind of wanted to set up a scenario of what I think many parents go through when they are attending an IEP meeting. So in this scenario, we have the special education teacher thanking everybody for attending, indicating that Johnny has made progress on all of his goals, but he's still getting into trouble with his peers in the hallways and at lunch. The principal had Johnny sign a no contact contract with the students he doesn't get along with. So they will stay away from each other. And if Johnny doesn't follow it, he's going to get suspended. And Johnny indicates that he tries to, but they keep coming up to him at lunch and in the hallways, and he's not going to run and look like a chicken. And the response is, if you don't follow it, you're going to be suspended. So mom says, what can be done about the other kids who keep bothering Johnny? And basically the principal responds that they've signed the contract too, and we can't talk about it because of confidentiality. So the teacher comes up with the suggestion that Johnny can eat lunch in his room. That way he won't have contact with those kids. He could use some extra help on his homework anyway. So this concerns mom and said, I thought you said he progressed on all of his goals. The special education teacher says he has behavior goals since he's on an IEP for behavior, but he does not have a learning disability, so he cannot have academic goals. And the teacher explains he's having a hard time completing multi-step problems and he's at risk of failing. So the mom asks if Johnny can have a para to help him with math or put him in a different class. And the response is that the para is too restrictive and we don't have a different class that would fit Johnny's needs. And the principal believes Johnny needs to learn how to start doing these things on his own anyway, because he's not going to have supports and accommodations in college. So basically then the meeting ends and everything stays the same and mom is left feeling frustrated. So I think a lot of times after we leave an IEP meeting, we're feeling frustrated and we hear things like he can't have a goal or a service because it doesn't relate to his disability, or we don't provide those services once she gets into middle school or high school, or he has to do the work, we can't do it for him, or having a para is more restrictive, it keeps her from interacting with other students. What I want you to know about this information, I always get asked, what can we put into an IEP? What kind of services? How do we qualify for these services? IDEA is a very broad language, uses very broad language in the regulations in the law, because they want to make sure that it incorporates or that it provides enough leeway so we can meet the individual needs of each student. So, so we have to have a present level of academic achievement, annual goals, and special education and related services that enable the child to progress in the general education curriculum. It doesn't say that you can't have a certain goal if you can't have an academic goal if you're on an IEP for social skills. It doesn't say that a para is too restrictive, that it has very broad language. So what we need to focus on is what will allow this child to progress in the general education curriculum. So the purpose of IDEA is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education, or what we call FAPE, in the least restrictive environment. So it's the whole purpose behind IDEA. It is why our children are on IEPs, so that they have the ability to be with their non-disabled peers, not segregated, as close to their home as possible, not a school in another neighborhood, county, or state, so that they can be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum. And that curriculum should help prepare them to be equal members of society, including further training, education, employment, independent living, and community participation. So if our child is not in that least restrictive environment, if our child is not participating in the general education curriculum, and when we talk about general education curriculum, it's not just the regular education setting, it's the whole school environment. Includes navigating the school building, recess, lunch, after school activities, anything that a typical student would be doing. And if our child is not able to participate in that, why not? And what are we doing to get our child there? So if you can relate whatever you want for your child back to how it's going to help your child progress in the general education curriculum in the least restrictive environment, then that would be supporting information to get that service, support, accommodation, modification, whatever that might be. And please, by the way, if anybody has any questions about anything, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and Julie will relay those to me, and I'm happy to answer those as we go along. So I'm going to go over the components of the IEP, and I'm going to be giving you examples as we go through each of the components of the type of information that goes in there and why that information is important, or how we use that information. So this is just, and I will be referring to DESE's template for the IEP. Your school district's IEP may look a little bit different, but it should have the same components. And the first one is that demographic page that just lists the information about the student and who attended the meeting, etc. So the first component of the IEP is the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. And under the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, we have to include all of this information. And I know that that's a little difficult to see all of those bullet points, but I will be going over each one individually. The present level of academic achievement and functional performance provides the basic or the basis for all of the programming and all of the services and all of the supports that is provided to the child in order to receive FAPE. So it should be very detailed information. I want you to also notice that the name of it includes academic achievement and functional performance. So it's not just how the child is performing in academics, in reading and writing and math and science and social studies. It's also how are they functioning in the school environment? How are they navigating that building? How are they doing meeting classroom expectations or following the rules, interacting with peers? All of those things. How are they functioning in the cafeteria and in recess and PE? Are they able to access that the same as their non-disabled peers or function the same as their non-disabled peers? So we want to, when we're writing the present level, we want to make sure that we're thinking of that whole environment. So this, again, I know this is small, but I'll be going over each of it. So this is Desi's template of what it looks like, and it has each of those bullet points. So like I said, parents often ask me what type of information goes into an IEP. And so I've created a tool that parents can use to prepare for IEP meetings. And that is is what I call the portrait of my child. And this will be a handout that will be sent to you after this webinar is over, that you can use in order to prepare input into the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. I know that many times when we're in IEP meetings, there's already a draft present level, and that's okay. And that's okay, but I want parents to know that you should be contributing information into that present level as well. You know your child best, and the information that you provide is very valuable. So I'm going to go over each one of these bullet points. And the first one is how the child's disability affects his or her involvement and progress in the general education curriculum, or for preschool children, participation in age-appropriate activities. So this is the whole reason why the child is on the IEP, because their disability affects their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. Remember, the purpose behind IDEA is in order for that person with a disability to be involved and progress in the general education curriculum. So this should be a large portion of the present level, and it should be very detailed information. So let me give you an example. When we look at portrait of my child, the questions, what does my child struggle with? What are his struggles in school, at home, and in the community? How does he handle frustrations from his struggles or other things? How does he get along with adults, teachers, peers, and siblings? These are questions that you can answer to develop input into that section of the present level of how the child's disability affects his or her involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So let's look at this example. Johnny is easily distracted. So that is a symptom, or that is what we see affects his progress and involvement in the general education curriculum. He's easily distracted. but how does it impact him? What does it look like for Johnny? In this case, this can prevent him from getting information. In school, he may miss instruction. In a conversation, he may not have heard everything that is said and may respond incorrectly due to only getting partial information. Okay, so we know how it affects him academically, but also functionally when he's having a conversation with somebody, whether that be the conversation with a teacher regarding academics or conversation when he's working with one of his peers, etc. Because of his struggles, Johnny can become frustrated. So again, here is something that affects his progress and involvement in the general education curriculum. He gets frustrated, but what does it look like for Johnny? In the past, he has been physically aggressive with others. However, he has learned to remove himself from a situation before this occurs. He will still talk fast, raise his voice, and become extremely fidgety. He may shut down and walk away. He may slam books, throw pencils, rip up assignments, and cuss. He may perseverate on what he is saying to get his point across and not listen to the other person. Okay, so just a little bit about that situation. So if your child has been physically aggressive or is physically aggressive, make sure that that information is in the present level under how the disability affects. That information is necessary if your child is being disciplined, suspended, because we want to make sure that we can show that those behaviors or discipline infractions are related to the disability, so that that child continues to receive his education in that least restrictive environment, in that most normative environment. So that's important information. And you want to be very specific with what it looks like. And in this instance, when we described it, what it looks like for Johnny, that he talks fast and raises his voice and becomes extremely fidgety. This gives the team information on how to support Johnny. So if he's talking fast, if he's raising his voice, if he's fidgety, then we know that he's frustrated. So now we're cued to provide him supports for that frustration, whatever the team ended up determining was necessary for him. And it goes on. So at times, Johnny can be overwhelmed in social situations. And what it looks like for him is that he prefers to watch others instead of join in, or does his own thing in the same room with others. Sometimes he prefers to be alone. So again, this is something that involves how he functions in the school environment. So knowing what that looks like, we can develop supports, interventions, goals, etc., to address those things. Johnny struggles with being organized and following through on things. And in this case, Johnny is in high school, transition age. So it's appropriate to talk about school at home or elsewhere. He doesn't recognize what needs to be done, forgets what needs to be done, has difficulty developing a plan. In school, he often has missing assignments, so that's how it affects his progress. He doesn't know how to manage his personal needs. He forgets if he's taken a shower, cannot break down the steps necessary to clean his room or clean up after himself. Out in the community, he's easily lost and has difficulty staying focused. So that would be indication of maybe some transition services that he needs. It takes him a long time to process information. It affects how long it takes him to complete assignments or tasks and respond in conversation. So that would be indications of accommodations or modifications that Johnny might need. So the next section is the strengths of the child. Okay, and from a portrait of my child, the set of questions that says, what does my child like to do? What is he good at? What are the good things about school? What are the good things about home and out in the community? So in this example, Johnny loves to play video games. He loves science and history. He remembers very specific facts about things he is interested in. He is very smart. He has a high IQ. He participates well in classroom discussion and provides good feedback. Johnny wants to be with people and is socially aware. He has 2 real friends. He is involved in cross country and track and puts forth great effort into his running. He appreciates the encouragement from his teammates and gives encouragement back. So in this situation, we want to include those things that will help Johnny progress in the general education curriculum. So Johnny loves to play video games. If he is struggling with completing maybe math homework or some other type of assignment, if we presented the instruction in the form of a video game, he may be able to persist through that. He may be able to understand the concepts better. He loves science and history. So if he's in English class and he's struggling reading through an assigned book, if we instead give him an alternative assignment that has to do with science and history, but still works on the same skills, this will allow him to progress in the general education curriculum using his strengths. He has a high IQ. Now, this is not detailed information. This is parent input, but I will tell you that you also want to include strengths that were noted from the evaluation as well, because that breaks down very specific skills on how a child learns best and what their strengths are. So we want to make sure we're building on those strengths from the evaluation. He participates well in classroom discussions and provides good feedback. So it may be that instead of requiring Johnny to write down his answers, that we allow him to give his answers verbally or grade him on his feedback and his discussion rather than on assignments. He wants to be with people and is socially aware. He has 2 real friends. He's involved in cross country and all of that. So that's information that could lead to possible post-secondary goals, whether it be for further education or training or employment. It might, involved in something that has to do with running or track or cross country, etc. Something that has to do with people. This can also be something that's very, very motivating for Johnny in order to keep his grades up or in order to participate in cross country and track. That would be motivation for him to keep his grades up so he can continue to qualify for that. So the other thing that I need to tell you, as you're preparing, as you're going through Portrait of My Child and preparing that information for input into the development of the IEP, this is a collaborative process. So even though the school might have a draft IEP with that present level, that doesn't mean that it's solely their decision on what goes into it or solely the parent's decision. So what I typically do when I'm preparing for an IEP meeting is I'll go through this information, and you can handwrite it. You could do bullet points, however you want to, however you want to do it. And as we're reviewing that draft present level, I typically check off the information. Okay, yes, they discussed they have the same information that this parent feels is important to put in there, or they did describe this well, and I'll kind of compare my notes. And as long as the information is sufficient, then that's fine the way it's put in the draft or put into the IEP. However, if there's information that I feel is missing, or if the information is not specific or descriptive enough, typically what I do is just provide a suggestion. Mom really felt that this information was important. And this is what she sees when this happens. And then there's a discussion, and then the team determines how to put that information into the present level. So it may not be exactly as you presented it, but that's how I present it to the team for consideration on how to put into the present level. So the next section of the present level of academic achievement and functional performance is concerns of the parent or guardian for enhancing the education of the child. I will tell you that this is the only section of the IEP where parents have complete say in what goes into this section and how it's written. So what I suggest is that parents prepare their concerns prior to the IEP meeting and send those concerns to the case manager prior to the IEP meeting. It's okay to be transparent. It's okay to let them know what your concerns are, because the requirement is that they have to address those concerns. Now, the way they address the concerns may not be to your satisfaction, but you get to document your concerns. And there's other tools that you can use if the way your concerns are addressed are not to your satisfaction. When preparing your parent concerns, oh, and by the way, if during the IEP meeting additional concerns come up, you can just update your parent concerns and send the updated concerns to the case manager to insert as you've written them. When you're preparing your parent concerns, I always suggest to kind of do that in 3 parts. So we're always asked, what are your concerns for this next IEP cycle? What do you want to address for this IEP term? And that is very appropriate, and we need to talk about what that priority is for this immediate year. However, I feel it's very important to give the IEP team a direction and make sure that that direction is documented of what are your hopes and dreams for your child. Where would you like to see him 3 years from now? What are your hopes and dreams for him after high school? What I find is that typically parents have different expectations or aspirations for their child than the IEP, than other IEP team members. So it may be that you want your child to be competitively employed. However, other IEP team members believe that your child will be employed in a sheltered workshop or in a day program. It may be your expectation or hope that your child will live independently or go to college or do whatever. You need to make sure that the team is aware of what your expectations are. Because if we have 2 different ideas, 2 different directions, then we're going to have competing ideas on what services and supports to provide that child. So, well, first of all, let me kind of just go over this example. So we would like to see Johnny increase his ability to recognize what tasks need to be completed and make a plan to complete those tasks. So that is addressing the current IEP term. We feel this is an important step in following his goal of going to college to become a computer programmer. So that is our long-term hopes for him after high school. We also feel this is necessary for him to be able to live on his own. We want Johnny to be able to handle social situations without getting into trouble. We want Johnny to be happy and have true friendships and relationships. We want him to be a full contributing member of society. So in this case, that's probably more of a midterm expectation or hope for him, is to develop those true friendships and relationships. But when I think about where I would like to see my child 3 years from now, I typically think about those typical times. So going from preschool to kindergarten, and then going from elementary school to middle school to high school, and then high school and beyond. So when I think about the transition from elementary school to middle school, I think about the different expectations. And if I want my child to remain in the least restrictive environment, if I want my child to remain in the regular education setting, then what skills am I going to be working on, or what direction or what stepping stone do we need to look at in order to make sure that my child will be successful in the middle school setting? In elementary school, my child only had one main teacher to give her the instruction. She had recess every day, twice a day sometimes. Her lunch choices were sack lunch or hot lunch, or she brought her own. She had one desk where she had to keep different things, or all of her belongings and materials, etc. But when you go to middle school, you have 6 different teachers with 6 different expectations. You have PE every day when you have to dress out. So are there concerns with dressing out and PE every day? You have a huge selection at lunch, and not just those 2 or 3 choices. And nobody limits you on how much money you spend. And I don't have a desk, I have a locker, and all of those things. So you want to think about those things that are coming up, that next transition that's coming up, so that you have a direction on where to go. And those of you that are familiar with charting the life course, I find that this is a great tool to use whenever you're concerned about either any of those transition points, or and also for those long-term objectives. You can use the portfolio to describe what the good life is, what supports I need, etc., where I can get those supports. So what do I want, what is the good life, and what don't I want? So I see that there's a few questions here, and maybe I can take a minute to answer them before we go on to the next one. I'm going to wait.
2 of the questions I think will come up as we discuss Form G, because they're about distance learning.
Okay.
And along the lines of distance learning, so many of our students in St. Louis City and St. Louis County have started the school in a distance learning platform. For the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, are there any tips you'd give that parents need to consider to make sure is included in this section with that distance learning taking place?
Yes, and actually we're going to get to it shortly, because that is that's a section that's been added to the present level. It's specifically addressing distance learning. So we'll be getting to that shortly. I see that Michelle had a question. If your child has no learning disability but continues to struggle in school, what then? Okay, so this is a little bit off topic, but I'm not sure if your child is on an IEP or not. If we're talking about your child is on an IEP but doesn't have a learning disability and struggles in school, you can still request academic services. It does not matter how your child is identified, whether it be under autism, emotional disturbance, other health impairment, or whatever eligibility category was determined. You can still address academics through the IEP. And the way you would do that is to request those services, to request or a goal for reading, or a goal for math, or whatever that struggle is. And if the district refuses to provide or include that goal and provide services, because remember, the purpose of IDEA is to progress in the general education curriculum. So if your child is struggling progressing in the general education curriculum, then it would be appropriate to put that in the IEP. And if the district refuses, then you want to ask for what's called a notice of action refused. So I will say that one more time, a notice of action refused, which the district is required to provide anytime a parent requests something regarding the identification, evaluation, educational placement, or provision of FAPE for your child. If you request it and the district refuses, then they have to give you a notice of action refused that documents why they are refusing to provide that goal, that service, that instruction, etc. So that's what I would recommend. Just as an aside, I will let you know that probably to understand what to do in that situation more, you probably want to take the workshop eligibility under IDEA and another workshop called evaluations under IDEA or understanding evaluations. And I am FACT is offering those virtually over the fall and winter, and that schedule will be out soon on our Facebook, and I always share it with the ARC and Easter Seals and other agencies as well. Okay, back to the components or the present level of the IEP. Oh, I should have said. So the next section after the concerns of the parent is changes in current functioning of the child since the initial or prior IEP. So from Portrait of My Child, there are two sets of questions that you can use in order to provide input into changes in current functioning of the child. And those two sets of questions are: what information have I received from school about how he is doing? So those are literally what changes have occurred over this past year. In this situation, Johnny's doing well managing his frustrations in class and using his coping skills. He still has problems with his peer in the hallways and at lunch. There's a group of kids that bother him. They've signed a no contact contract. Johnny is struggling in math, completing multi-step problems, and is at risk of failing. He needs a lot of help. Johnny can work with his math teacher during lunch, which will also keep him away from the kids that bother him. The principal feels Johnny needs to learn how to complete his assignments without supports, accommodations since he won't have them in college. So this is a really nice way to document in the present level, kind of addressing that child is struggling in school, even though he's not on an IEP for learning disabilities. He's on an IEP under emotional disturbance or for those coping skills. That this is affecting his progress in the general education curriculum. So I would certainly request that this information be added to the present level and changes of current functioning. I do want to kind of talk about this for just a moment. So the team was able, or the teacher was able to identify that he was struggling completing a multi-step problem. So a goal could be developed focusing on multi-step problems, and that could be included in math class and or other classes. Also, Johnny can work with his math teacher during lunch, which will also keep him away from the other kids that bother him. I want to talk about that because sometimes those solutions sound really good, but we're not really following the purpose of IDEA. So pulling Johnny out from his regular lunch takes him out of the least restrictive environment. He's not doing the same thing as his non-disabled peers anymore. In addition to that, we're not really addressing the issue that Johnny is having with peers in the hallways and lunch. We really want Johnny to be able to learn how to handle those social situations in that unstructured setting that he's not doing well with at this time. So that could lead to a goal. Additionally, he's getting help from the classroom teacher with multi-step problems, and we don't have that documented in the IEP. So if you have that type of situation where a teacher's doing something a little bit extra, a little bit different, and it's not documented in the IEP, we need to document that in the IEP. The other thing I want to talk about is the principal feels Johnny needs to learn how to complete assignments without supports and accommodations. So we don't just take supports and accommodations away because we feel that the child needs to learn how to function without them. If that is what the team determines needs to happen, is that the child needs to learn how to function without those, then that needs to be a goal. And we make that a goal that he will increase his ability to, to turn in his assignments and not use extended time or whatever that is, whatever that accommodation or modification is. So we have to show that the child doesn't need that accommodation or modification before we remove them. And the only way to get or to make that happen is to give that child instruction so they no longer need that. So I would request that that be a goal and that services be provided so that those supports and accommodations are no longer necessary. The other part the other input that I think is good to put in this section of the present level, changes in current functioning, is strategies that help your child. How does someone work best with him? What would I like teachers to know about my child when working with him? So in this instance, it describes when working with Johnny, it's best to make sure you have his attention by prompting him prior to speaking to him. And it describes what that looks like. If talking to a group, make sure you have eye contact, or if there's no eye contact, ask him to repeat back what he has heard. Provide written step-by-step instructions. If Johnny shows signs of frustration, allow him to finish what he is saying. Make sure you have wait time of up to 30 seconds when waiting for him to respond. And this is where you put those strategies that work well. So when we're looking at this IEP, we know what kind of supports and services and instruction, or how to present that instruction, what works well for him. And you want to make sure what works well for him is documented. The other thing that goes in this section of the present level in changes of current functioning is progress on goals. So the progress that your child made from the previous IEP should be included in this section. And how the child achieved that progress should be included. So it shouldn't just be that Johnny progressed on his goals, or Johnny achieved his goal number 1 on social interactions at 70% accuracy. I want it described on what that looks like. So Johnny was able to use his coping skills to increase social interactions. He was able to use his coping skills 80% of the time, which allowed him to increase his social skills or social interactions. He was able to respond appropriately without frustration, whatever those benchmarks are, or whatever those skills are that were worked on or needed in order to progress on those goals, that should be described in the progress on goals in this section of the present level. Okay, the next section is a summary of the most recent evaluation or reevaluation results. So, oh, and by the way, so those 4 bullet points: how the child's disability, the strengths of the child, concerns of the parent or guardian, and changes in current functioning. That is all what's included in Portrait of My Child. The rest of these bullet points, I'm going to just give you some information about those. But that's how you can help a parent, or a parent can prepare input into the development of the IEP. The next section is a summary of the most recent evaluation or reevaluation results. So when you look at this section of the IEP, you want to make sure that that summary is detailed enough to provide good information to the team to determine programming needs. So I have an example here of a full-scale IQ. And as a matter of fact, my son is 26 years old. This is his full-scale IQ, or one of the measurements that gave us a full-scale IQ for him. And it was a while ago, so it only has 5 indexes or 5 composite scores, as opposed to the new WISC, which is the WISC 5, which has 5 indexes or composite scores. But regardless, I want to use this as an example to explain to you why detail of the results of the evaluation is necessary in that summary. So in this situation, my son's full-scale IQ was 109. His verbal comprehension index, which is his ability to use language to reason and problem solve, was 119. His perceptual reasoning, which is his ability to reason using nonverbal, using visuals and things like that, was 127. His working memory was an 84, and working memory is the ability to hold information in the short term and manipulate that information. And his processing speed, how efficiently he processed information, was a 72. So I know for some people, these numbers are meaningless. So these are pictures of the separate indexes and his full scale IQ when we look at a bell curve chart. And by the way, this is a tool that you can use. It's called PAR Toolkit, P-A-R Toolkit, and it helps you understand what those numbers mean. It compares standard scores, scaled scores, percentile rank, Z-scores, and T-scores. So no matter how, no matter what type of score is used, whether it be standard, scaled, etc., T-score, Z-score, you can kind of get an idea of whether or not it's a strength or a weakness, or how severe, or how what that impact is from that score. So if I look at the first one here for his full scale IQ, that's this one right here. You can see that his full scale IQ of 109 fell in the average range. When we look at that bell curve, the middle 2 sections show the average range, and he was a little on the higher side of the average range. But when we look at his different skill sets, how he learns with verbal, using words or language, or using visuals, or how he processes information, that's completely different. And when we look at the bell curve here for his verbal skills, we see that he's in the above average range. So he scores higher than 90% of the population. When we look at his nonverbal reasoning skills, he's in almost the superior range, and he scores higher than 96% of the population. But how he processes information, he is really a huge weakness for him. His working memory is in the 14th percentile, meaning only 14 kids out of 100, or people out of 100, would have weaker working memories than him. And that would be an indication of why he needs written instructions to refer to, because it's very challenging for him to hold information in the short term. When we look at processing speed, that's even more severe impact. He's in the 3rd percentile which means that only 3 people out of 100 score lower than him, which would explain why it takes him a long time to process information and would indicate that he needs extended time to complete assignments and tests and to respond in conversation and all of that. So make sure when the summary of the evaluation results is included in the present level, that the information is broken down enough so that you can determine programming needs, so that you can determine any needed accommodations or modifications or supports. Okay, so the next section is a summary of the results of the child's performance on formal or informal age-appropriate transition assessments. So this is only required when the child reaches the age of 16. So if the child's going to turn 16 within that IEP cycle, then we would need to have a summary of the transition assessments. And that is a whole separate topic that I don't go into very much, or I don't go into in this presentation. But types of transition assessments could include behavioral assessments, aptitude tests, interest and work value inventories, IQ tests, achievement tests, preference tests, readiness tests, self-determination. You want to make sure that if your child is of transition age, that you are doing all of these types of transition assessments so that you can have good information to develop that transition plan. And then here's the new part of the IEP with that DESE issued guidance on. Is we're adding more information into the present level of how the child's disability impacts the selection of distance learning options during unplanned school closures throughout the school year. And we have to include relevant factors that would impact the student's ability to have equitable, think about that, equitable access to distance learning opportunities, including assistive technology, instructional supports available at home, and previous experience with distance learning. So here is a very short example of the type of information that could go into the present level for this section. When we look at assistive technology, Cody will require the use of assistive technology to assist him with meeting his goals while attending virtual learning. The AT team will trial the use of Google Read Write. This app will read materials to him and assist him with spelling and grammar for writing assignments. So, by the way, in this situation, Cody has a learning disability in reading. Instructional supports available at home. A para will also be available virtually to support Cody while doing independent work to ensure understanding of reading materials and assist with proper written expression for writing assignments. A Chromebook and hotspot will be made available to him. And then we have to include information about previous experience with distance learning during spring 2020, or previous experience with distance learning. So during spring 2020, Cody struggled with virtual instruction and independent work time. The team has determined that additional support of assistive technology and adult support is needed for him to make progress on his annual goals. So what I want you guys to note about this is, first of all, remember that everything that we put in this present level of academic achievement and functional performance lays the foundation for all of the goals, services, supports, accommodations, and modifications that are provided to the child in order to receive that free, appropriate public education. So we need to be very detailed in this information. Now for Cody, at this time, my guess is that distance learning was was a lot of independent work. So there wasn't a lot of live virtual instruction or anything like that, but it was a lot of independent work. Um, uh, and he didn't do well. So he needs, and if there was virtual instruction, he had a hard time accessing it because of his learning disability and reading comprehension. It's very important, you as parents who lived the distance learning this past spring, provide detailed information about what that looked like. So I was just recently talking to a mom whose son is nonverbal, who does not and her son does not read or write. So he really was not able to access any learning virtually. He requires one-on-one support at all times to keep him, well, not just to keep him safe, but to implement the behavior support plan that he has to keep him on task in order to progress on his goals. So even though a district might be providing 100% of their instruction virtually, the district is not relieved of their responsibility to provide that free, appropriate public education to the child with a disability under IDEA. And that has been reinforced through the U.S. Department of Education as well as Congress when different bills were passed in order to provide support to schools during this pandemic. No district has been relieved of their responsibility to provide that free, appropriate public education. So that means that, so first of all, that means we don't change the goals because we are now providing, or the instruction is now being provided virtually. We change the supports that need to be provided in order for the child to access their curriculum, their programming. So whatever that IEP says, and that can include, even though the district is only providing virtual instruction, it can include face-to-face, in-person instruction. What that looks like and how that is provided is determined by the team and is documented on Form G, that new Form G that everybody had to complete this year and update their IEP. So, hands-on therapies, PT therapies, OT therapies, speech and language. That's another one that can be really difficult. Sometimes for some kids, that speech and language therapy or some of those other therapies may be able to be provided via telehealth or some other platform, virtual platform. But for some kids, that's not going to be provided. We are required to individualize those services and supports based on the needs of the individual child. So, for instance, the mom that I was talking to recently, the child cannot access his instruction, his programming, his services in any type of virtual platform. He needs in-person instruction. So the team, they can determine whether or not the child is brought into one classroom, if it's one-on-one setting, what kind of precautions need to be taken in order to provide that instruction in that one-on-one setting, whether that includes PPE gear, whether that includes, sanitizing the environment, temperature checks, whatever that might be. Or it could be an alternative location, or it could be in the home. That is a team determination. And if a district is refusing to individualize to meet the individual needs of the student, your course of action is to request a notice of action refused to provide that in-person learning in order to provide that free, appropriate public education. the districts cannot do a one size fits all. We are still required to provide individual programming for students on IEPs. So I hope that answers a question: what rights do families have for a child that needs in-person hands-on therapies, but school district is 100% virtual? You need to formally request that in-person hand-on therapy, and you need to request that that be part of the distance learning plan. Yeah, and then the next question is, if a paraprofessional was recommended at the end of last school year, can that service be added to the current year's IEP? Oh, did I just switch things? Hang on.
You want me to finish that question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to read it, and I think I messed up the. Yeah.
No problem. So if a paraprofessional was recommended at the end of the last school year, can that service be added to the current year's IEP if the child is participating in distance learning until it is safe to resume in-person learning?
Yes, and in fact, if it was determined in an IEP meeting that the child needed a paraprofessional, that should have been placed in the IEP. And even if the child is participating in distance learning at this time, that different support, or not having that para because it's distance learning, should be documented on Form G. So the team determined during times of school closure or distance learning, however you want to word it, this is how the instruction is going to be delivered in order to provide that child FAPE. So we've had lots and lots of kids who have been even more successful with not having to go to school and not having to deal with all of those distractions, and really worked well online. You know, they love computers and different things like that. So it might be appropriate to still have that virtual learning. And if it's not necessary to have a para during virtual learning, that change in that IEP from the general educational setting to the distance learning should be documented in Form G. And I hope that answers that question. Okay. So, and then the last section of the present level of academic achievement and functional performance talks about, for students participating in alternative assessments, a description of benchmarks or short-term objectives. So, and this is what it looks like on DESE's sample template or IEP template. And basically what IDEA says is that if your child is participating in the alternative state assessment, or in Missouri we call it MAP-A, or you might know it as dynamic pathways, then we are required to include benchmarks and objectives. And those benchmarks or objectives can be listed in the present level, or those benchmarks and objectives can be listed on the goal pages. All of the districts that I have worked in, those benchmarks and objectives are included in the goal pages. So I don't see it listed in the present level, and that's okay, as long as benchmarks and objectives are included on the goal pages. And objectives and benchmarks break those goals down into very specific skills or measures of progress, stepping stones of progress. Those are benchmarks. Objectives are breaking down those skills. Okay, can't stress this enough. Why is this information important? Because you are the expert on your child. Your input is important into the development of the IEP. You are part of this team. Your input is required under IDEA. Parent participation is one of the rights under IDEA. And we want the present level of academic achievement and functional performance to pass what we call the stranger test. So when you're reviewing your child's IEP, you want to look at it and ask, are the academics and functioning emotionally, behaviorally, socially, accessing the whole environment in the school setting described? Is the how explained? Do we have good detailed information? Think ahead, what skills will my child need for the next transition? Does this team have a clear direction for my child after he graduates from high school? Is the progress on goal included and made clear how my child achieved that progress? Do the evaluation results provide enough explanation to describe how he learns and what supports he needs? And this is the stranger test. Can I take this present level alone and create goals, provide appropriate instruction, determine any needed supports, and determine appropriate placement from this information alone? So that's really important as you're going through the IEP, and if you develop a goal and I can't tie that goal back to information in the present level, or you develop or you provide a service or an accommodation or a modification and we can't tie that back to information in the present level, then we need to add that information in the present level. Why does the child need a para? Why does the child need specialized transportation? Why does the child need extended time? Why does the child need this? I should be able to tie everything in the rest of the IEP back to the present level. And if you're going through the IEP and you're not able to, just say, hey, I agree this is necessary, but we don't have any information in the present level to indicate why this is necessary. Can we add that to the present level? That's all you have to do. All right, I know that was a lot of information, but that is the most important part of the IEP. The next section or the next component of the IEP is the special considerations page. And what IDEA says, we have to consider all of these things when we're developing those goals and services and supports. So is the student blind or visually impaired? And if so, do they need Braille and instruction in Braille, and has a referral to rehabilitation services for the blind been made? Is the student deaf or hard of hearing? If so, what are his communication needs and how are we supporting that? What is their mode of communication? Does the student exhibit behaviors that impede his or her learning or that of others? So remember when I talked about at the beginning of this presentation that IDEA provides broad language so that we can meet the unique needs of individuals and not exclude individuals when we're not intending to. So IDEA does not define what what behaviors impede his or her learning or that of others. So it doesn't say it's behaviors that impede learning are only behaviors that cause the child to be suspended or disciplined or aggressive behaviors or anything like that. It can be any behavior at all. We just need to determine that that there's a behavior that impedes the child's learning. And if so, and I'm going to bring up the IEP really quick so I can show you as soon as it opens. Here we go. Sorry, it's going slow. There we go. So you'll see here that if the team determines that there are behaviors that impede the child's learning and their learning of others, that strategies, including positive behavior interventions and supports, must be considered by the IEP team, and if determined necessary, addressed in this IEP. So we have to consider, hey, if there's a behavior, we have to think about positive behavior supports. And if the team determines that they're necessary, they need to be included in the IEP. And if a behavior intervention plan is developed, it must be part of the IEP. It doesn't say that the child has to be aggressive or the child has to be suspended or any of that. It could be that the child is just refusing to complete a task or shutting down or something like that. So if the district is not addressing those behaviors, and they're not checking this box, yes, you can ask for that notice of action refused to address those behaviors. I will tell you that if the child is being suspended, if the child is being taken out of that least restrictive environment, so not in the regular education setting, but now they have to be in the behavior disorder room all day, or they're constantly spending the day in the principal's office or in the calming room or something like that, then I would absolutely insist that this box be checked. It holds the district accountable to provide those positive behavior supports. The next one is, does the student have limited English proficiency? And if so, how are we going to address their communication needs within this IEP and document it within this IEP? Does the student have communication needs? This is another one where oftentimes parents are told we only check that box if the child is receiving services through a speech and language pathologist. Where is oh, there we go. So IDEA, again, is very broad. It says, does the student have communication needs? IDEA does not say we only check this box if the child is receiving services from an SLP, a speech and language pathologist. I know many students who don't receive services from a speech and language pathologist, but they have a hard time expressing their frustration or their emotions, or communicating with their peers or communicating with their teachers. And we need to address that. So I'm not necessarily concerned if this box is checked, but I want to make sure that those communication needs are addressed in the IEP, either through a goal or through an accommodation or a modification or a service, which could include social skills instruction, even though it's not provided by a speech and language pathologist. I'll go ahead and just use this. Does the student require assistive technology? So this is any type of assistive technology, and I know that we have lots and lots of technology available to all students, but I want parents to know that if the team determines that the child needs a tablet, Chromebook, whatever, IEP or iPad, in order to progress on their goals or access the school environment, and remember it's the whole school environment, then we need to check this box, yes. It doesn't matter if the same technology is available to all students. If the team determined that's what this child needs, it should be documented on this page and in the IEP. Extended school year. So this is another one of those situations where families are told that, here, let me just go ahead and I'll pull this up. You have to qualify for extended school year. First and foremost, we have to consider every year whether or not the child needs extended school year. And it's not just based on regression and recoupment. extended school year, and this is guidance by Advocacy, by the way, and if you want to look it up, you can use the link that's provided here, or you can just go to Advocacy's website, and in the search box up here, put extended school year policies, and it will link you to this page. But the guidance that Advocacy provides when formulating district policy to consider the following factors that came from various court cases. And so we have to not just consider regression and recoupment, we have to consider the nature of the child's disability, the severity of the disability, areas of learning crucial to the child's attainment of self-sufficiency and independence, their progress, all of these things, opportunity to practice the skills, availability of resources, areas of the child's curriculum that needs continuous attention, their vocational needs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I highly recommend that you look at this guidance when determining your child's extended school year needs. It is not just it's not necessarily just to maintain the child's abilities. It can be to progress. And let me give you an example. I was advocating for a young man who was transitioning from preschool services to kindergarten. He has apraxia and he has severe apraxia. So even though he made progress with his preschool services and he was increasing his ability to produce those speech sounds, he was entering kindergarten not being understood by anybody. So even the familiar listener, even his mom, could only understand a few words, 2 to 3 words that he was trying to say. And so because of the severity of his disability, and because this is such an area, a crucial area to the attainment of self-sufficiency and needed continuous attention, we requested extended school year services, not to maintain, because he had not regressed over breaks when he was receiving services in the preschool setting. We requested extended school year services in order to progress, because it was crucial for him to advance as much as possible in order to be in that, progress in that general education environment. He had no ability to be understood by anybody. He couldn't express his wants or needs or what knowledge he was gaining. He was going to be in a large environment. So that was included, or extended school year services were included. I had another situation of a student who had been hospitalized for suicidal ideations and attempts, and she had severe anxiety and depression, and she was not going to school. And it can be, and eventually over the course of the school year, we transitioned her from the homeschool setting. She was receiving her instruction in the home because she would not leave the home, to coming to school every day. Even though she was in the school every day, she would only be in one classroom. She wouldn't leave that classroom, and she was only working with one teacher, but at least she was coming into that setting. And we predicted that if we stopped that pattern, that she would regress, and we didn't want to risk that regression. So she continued to receive extended school year services over the summer, and they were individualized to meet her needs. The other thing that parents need to be aware of is, just because a child qualifies for extended school year services does not mean the only option is the district standard 2 to 3 weeks in June, or 2 to 3 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks in July at this school from this time to this time, and this is what we're going to work on. Extended school year services should be individualized to meet the unique needs of the child. So the next special consideration is transfer of rights, and that simply states that when the child turns 18, we have to notify the parents at least 1 year prior to the child turning 18 that educational decision making transfers to the student upon the student turning 18. We have to consider whether or not the child will be taking those state assessments, and if so, do they need the alternative assessment, and or if they need accommodations and modifications for those state assessments. If they're taking district-wide assessments, we have to consider whether or not they need accommodations and modifications. And then if they're of transition age, if they're turning 16 within that IEP cycle, then we need to develop a transition plan. And then the new one that's been added is the distance learning plan. Let me bring that back up. So let me just bring that up real quick to show you. So it shows here that the student needs a distance learning plan in case on-site services are not an option due to school closing. Complete Form G. And or the student's IEP has been modified to address the student's distance learning needs. So it's possible that we don't really need to change that much for some students in the situation of a school closing. So it's just a reminder that we need to develop a distance learning plan in the case of a school closure. Okay. So the next component of the IEP is now we're ready to create those goals. And I am not the best goal writer, but I do have two strategies that I use to determine whether or not a goal is written well. And first, I want everybody to understand that goals should be measured by taking data on a periodic basis. For me, that is the only way to get objective information to verify that the child is making progress on that goal. So the goal should be written so that we can take objective data. Progress on goals should be reported at least as often as progress is reported for regular education kids. So if the district issues quarterly report cards, then progress on goals has to be reported quarterly as well. So let me show you the two different ways that we use to look at a goal to make sure that it's a good goal. So you may have heard of SMART goals, and SMART stands for specific. Does it include the exact skill that is being worked on? So if there's a general statement that a child will, this is one of my favorite and not truly my favorite, I'm being sarcastic, child will comply with teacher directives 100% of the time. So what skill is needed for that child to comply with teacher directives? That's what should be in the goal. We want to measure a positive or something that we can see that's observable. So if your goal includes something, and I'm going to refer to it as a negative. So if the goal says the child will increase his ability to follow teacher directives by refraining from interrupting or whatever that skill might be, it's really hard to measure somebody refraining from something or not doing something. You want to measure something that the child has to do. So it should be very specific with the exact skill that needs to be worked on. Additionally, when we're looking at the goal, can it be implemented by anyone? So is it specific, descriptive enough that if I looked at it or Julie looked at it and we were measuring the exact same thing, we would come up with the exact same data. Okay, so if I was working, if we were both observing that child, using this goal to measure whether or not the child was achieving this goal, we would come up with the exact same answer. It should be measurable. So using a standard or level of competency. So that's typically when we get that accuracy level, but we can also include grade levels. So if we're talking about a reading goal, are they reading at the second grade level? And to define that even more for some kids, it might be appropriate to break it down, not just the second grade level, but the second grade 3-month level, or the second grade 5-month level, or something like that. Is it attainable? And the goal should be written for the student to achieve it by the end of the IEP period. If we have the same goal year after year after year, then we are not writing this goal correctly. We kind of going back to the student will follow teacher directives 100% of the time. Well, what is our baseline information? How often is he following teacher directives? If he's only following teacher directives 25% of the time, he's probably not going to get to 100% of the time by the end of this IEP cycle. And besides that, 100% of the time, we don't expect typical kids to do that. So I wouldn't expect a kid who struggles in this area to do that either. So is it attainable? Look at where the child is currently performing, and think about the amount of progress that is challenging and high expectations, but achievable by the end of that IEP period. Relevant. The specific skills that need to be worked on from the present level. So when we talked about the present level, we need to be able to tie goals and everything back. If you think about the situation with Johnny, and he was struggling in math class, and if I wrote a math goal that said he will complete math problems with 80% accuracy at his current grade level or whatever, that may not be relevant enough. What we discovered or determined was that he was having problems with multi-step problems, right? Completing multi-step problems. So if I just put math problems, that's not going to necessarily be relevant to the skill that needs to be worked on, because I could give him single step problems, one right after the other, and show that, oh my gosh, he's achieving it 100% of the time. That's because it's not relevant to what the issue is. The issue is really multi-step problems. So I need to make sure that that's in the goal. And then we want the goal to be time limited. So is it written to show the skill has been mastered over a period of time and not just by chance? So anybody might be able to show that they can complete a multi-step problem by chance once or twice. I want to make sure that the child is able to do it consistently. And in order to show that, that's where we get those 3 out of 5 opportunities or 4 out of 5 data days, so that we can show that the child is consistently performing that skill. So here's an example. Sam will increase his ability to complete a 5-step task by breaking the task into the steps needed to complete that task. So that's specific and relevant to the information from the present level. With 65% accuracy with 2 or less prompts per 5-step task, that is measurable and it is attainable based on Sam's current baseline information. And then on 3 out of 5 opportunities is the time limited. There's a second way that I like to look at goals, because when I'm looking at goals, I sometimes forget about how specific we need to be in certain situations. So, and that's called the who, what, how, where, and when. Who will achieve, what skill or behavior, how, what strategy, and what level. So the how is really what I like to focus on, the how and the where. And so when I look at the same goal, we have Sam will increase his ability to complete a 5-step task. So that's the what. How is he going to do that? By breaking the task into steps needed to complete the task with 65% accuracy with 2 or less prompts per 5-step task on 3 out of 5 opportunities. So it's important that, like, remember I said specific, that if Julie was going to measure this goal, she would come up with the same answer that I came up with if I'm measuring this goal. And if I'm working with Sam on completing this 5-step tasks, and I'm prompting him on every step of that task, and because I'm prompting him on every step of that task, he's doing it 100% of the time or 85% of the time. But Julie looks at this goal and she's only giving him 2 prompts or less per the whole 5-step task. She's going to say, no, he's not meeting this goal. So I would be measuring it wrong if I was prompting Sam more than 2 times during that task. So if we don't list the number of prompts that we need or how to measure whether or not they're actually achieving what we want to achieve, we're going to get different information and we're not going to get accurate information. So you want to be able to describe if they're completing that task or achieving that goal using prompts. Sometimes you need to include whether or not they're visual prompts or they're physical prompts or they're verbal prompts, because that could be different, make a difference depending on who the student is. The other thing that I want to look at is the where. Sometimes when we're first working on a goal or when we're working on goals with our kids, they're completing this goal or they're achieving this goal in the therapeutic setting. So if they have services with a speech and language pathologist and they're able to do it with the speech and language pathologist, but they're not able to do it in the regular education setting or with their peers, I want to describe what that looks like. So where is it in this? Is it in the therapeutic setting or is it in the classroom setting? And when I think about where as well, what does that where look like? So is it in the structured setting or unstructured setting? And if it's in an unstructured setting, is that recess or lunch? Or if it's in a group setting, what is that group setting? Is it a small group? What is a small group? Is a small group 3 to 5 kids? Is a large group 15 to 20? That should be described. So when I think about the where, I think about what is the setting and what does that look like? Is it a small group? Is it with a large group? Is it the classroom? Is it the therapeutic? Is it structured or unstructured? That all makes a difference. And that describes how the child is achieving that goal. And then by the end of the IEP date. Okay, we're getting close to the end. I know this is a lot of information and I hope that you guys are finding it helpful. So after we have written the goals, the team now determines, we have the service summary. And that's where the team determines the special education services, related services, any supplementary aids, and services, program modifications and accommodations and support for school personnel. So special education services are determined, and it's whatever needs to be provided in order for the child to meet those goals by the end of the IEP date. Related services are provided in order for the student to benefit from the instruction provided, and that's regular education instruction or special education instruction, and or access the environment and or meet post-secondary goals. So I want parents to know that there is no requirement to qualify for related services. So often when we're talking about related services, whether it be OT services, PT services, speech and language services, transportation, whatever that might be, we're told based on the results of the evaluation, the student didn't qualify for those services. There is no requirement to qualify for related services. All we need to do is determine whether or not the student needs that related service in order to benefit from the instruction provided, and that's special education and or regular education, or to access the environment, or to meet post-secondary goals. And again, if the district refuses to provide a related service that you feel is necessary in order for the child to progress in the general education curriculum or benefit from the instruction or access the environment, etc., you can ask for that notice of action refused. And the district will then have to document why they are refusing to provide that service. And they'll have to provide that documentation to you. Supplementary aids and services includes levels of support staff needed, so such as collaboration time. So if the regular education teacher needs to collaborate with the special education teacher in order to implement a part of the IEP or provide a support, or if they need to collaborate with the occupational therapist or behavior specialist, etc. That's all documented under supplementary aids and services. If there's any specialized equipment that the student needs, if there's a specific way to present the instruction, so if it needs to be in large print or needs to be in Braille, or if it needs to be presented verbally, or if it's presented in print, do we need to have it read to the person, etc. Any materials, modifications, testing, adaptation, all of that, social interaction support, staff training, para support. We also determine any program modifications and accommodations, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and supports for school personnel. So supports for school and personnel can include training. So training on how to take data, training on how to implement a positive behavior support, training on CPR, if that's a requirement, etc. So any type of training for the school personnel. And then this is just a list of related service examples. What I want you to know is related services can be anything. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just some examples of related services. So after we determine the special education related services and supplementary aids and services, the team needs to consider whether or not transportation is necessary as a related service. What they want parents to know is that all the same requirements apply for transportation as it does for the instruction provided and the programming provided for your child. So it should be in the least restrictive environment and necessary in order to benefit from the instruction or access the environment. They should be with their non-disabled peers with any necessary supplementary aids or services and supports for personnel. So if your child requires transportation as a related service, it may not be necessary that they ride a separate bus. We should start with the regular education bus first and then determine what kind of supports or supplementary aids and services we can provide on that regular education bus first. Whether that be a para support, a behavior support plan, accommodations that they can have different tools or with them, such as sensory items or listening to music, things like that. Then we determine regular education participation, and we have to determine whether or not the special education and related services can be provided 100% of the time in the regular education setting. So we should refer back to the service summary, but when we're determining that that instruction to be provided in order for the child to progress on those goals, just because it's provided by a special education teacher does not mean that it has to be provided in the special education setting. Special education is a service, it is not a placement. We need to look at whether or not that instruction can be provided in the regular education setting first. And if not, we have to explain why not. We have to consider participation in physical education and any adaptations or modifications. And then there has to be an assurance that the student can participate in non-academic and extracurricular activities. So what that means is that we cannot deny that child access to non-academic or extracurricular activities because of their disability. So if the school has a dance and they don't require that parents bring or attend with their child, then they can't require that a parent attend with their child in order for their child to attend that dance. Same thing for field trips, camps, anything like that, that the child can participate in those activities and the district would provide the support necessary for that child to have equal access. And after we've determined all of that, then we determine what that actual placement decision is. And it is an IEP team decision, and we have to consider all of this information, the unique needs of the child. So when we're determining whether or not that instruction can be provided in the regular education setting, we need to look at the unique needs of the child. Is that a setting that's appropriate for that child? We have to look at the meaning of the evaluation data, and we have to consider all of the different placement options, whether that be in the regular education setting 100% of the time, or a portion of the time, or if it's an alternative school or hospital setting or homebound. Okay, so I said I would address Form F, Accommodations and Modifications. And really what I just want to remind everybody is, and you may be familiar with this form. And really this is just guidance that was provided by DESE for just to help teams consider all different aspects that a child might need. Says, hey, look at grading. Do we need to provide any accommodations or modifications in grading or text or lectures, exams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, environment. And some of them are repetitive in different areas, but this is not an exhaustive list. It is whatever is needed in order for the student to access the environment and level the playing field. So when we use this form, I just want to make sure that it's detailed enough. Remember, we have to be able to anybody has to be able to implement these accommodations and modifications. So for instance, for preferential seating, what does that look like? I was advocating for a young man who had diagnoses of autism, ADHD, and PTSD. And due to his ADHD, he needed to be away from distractions and close to instruction. And so you would typically think, okay, we're going to sit him away from the door or the windows or wherever those distractions are, and we're going to sit him close to where the teacher teaches. However, because of his PTSD, he couldn't have anybody sit behind him. That made him very nervous and he wasn't able to focus. So for every class, that was going to look different, whether or not he faced the wall his back was to the wall, or however the teacher configured their classroom, it was going to look different. So we had to describe nobody sitting back behind him, away from distractions and close to instruction. Another one, an example I like to use is under reinforcement, check often for understanding and review. So that's something that my son utilized, and that should be described if it needs to be described. Because if I were a teacher and I was reading that and I said, okay, I need to check often for understanding and I need to review the information, I would go to my son and if I were the teacher, I would go to Sam and I would say, Sam, did you understand what I just said? And my son would say, I absolutely did or do. And he would really believe he did. But because he missed instruction so often, because he misinterpreted what was said so often, I had it included or described that when you're checking for understanding, that you have to have him repeat back what he heard, because he would repeat back something completely different than what the teacher said. And that really actually ended up improving his communication skills, because he then had to go back and forth with the teacher to clarify. So it was actually a great, ended up being kind of an instruction for him as well. So just remember when you're looking at Form F that there's enough description so that anybody can implement that accurately. Okay, so we are coming, believe it or not, we are actually coming to the end of this presentation. I appreciate you guys' patience and attention during this time, but I do want to give you a couple of tips of what you can do when there is not an agreement. First and foremost, we always want to resolve those issues, and we need to attempt to resolve those issues in an IEP meeting. And I want parents to remember that. So when issues come up throughout the year, during that IEP cycle, we typically start talking with the teacher, the case manager, maybe the principal, and we have a lot of discussion, and it's okay to talk to them, but don't let that go on too long, because if we start discussing solutions or changing things, and we don't have an IEP meeting and we don't formally document that, or we don't bring the team together to get all of that input, we can really just be spinning our wheels, and then we get frustrated. So make sure that if you're addressing concerns that occur throughout the school year, even though the IEP is not due, call that IEP meeting. And then if changes need to be made, make sure that that IEP is amended to reflect those changes. The IEP is a fluid document, and it is meant to be a fluid document so that we can address the changing needs of the individual student. That notice of action that I've referred to several times throughout this presentation. Anytime the parent disagrees with the identification, which means if they're identified under autism or OHI or whatever, or the evaluation, what evaluation was completed to gather that information to develop that IEP, the placement, so how much is that child in the regular education setting, or the provision of FAPE, which really has to do with anything in that IEP. The parents are entitled to a notice of action. So if a parent requests a goal, an accommodation, a service, something be inserted into the IEP, and the district refuses to do that, parents are entitled to that notice of action refuse. And it's okay to ask for that notice of action refuse. And then the district has to document why they're refusing to provide that service, that goal, that accommodation, or whatever it might be. Sometimes by requesting that, then it gets people thinking, well, why are we refusing this? And you might talk through it some more, and then they might determine that it's okay to provide that. DESE does provide the option of a facilitated IEP. I have participated in several facilitated IEPs, and this is a person who is trained in the process. They are neutral, and what they do is keep the IEP team on track, focused on the process, and they definitely are neutral. They gather information from both school personnel and parents prior to the meeting, and they don't tell a district if they're doing something wrong, or a parent if they can't ask for that. They just keep the team on track, and it can be very successful. Parents do, well, and I should say parents and school districts have the option of participating in voluntary mediation. It is voluntary, so it's if a parent requests it, the district does not have to agree. If the district requests it, the parent does not have to agree to that participation. If they do enter into voluntary mediation, it is paid for by Advocacy. Any agreement that comes out of voluntary mediation is enforceable. And then there are the appeal options that parents have. There's the child complaint and due process. So child complaint is for procedural errors, more like they did not the district did not provide meeting notification, or did not provide 10-day meeting notification, did not set a meeting date on a mutually agreeable date, or did not implement the IEP, or something like that. And that is resolved, that is investigated by Advocacy's compliance department and resolved within 60 days. Due process is very much like a court proceeding, and I would not recommend going to due process without a lawyer. It is for substantiative issues, basically that the district made the wrong decision, and that by making this decision, the district is not providing that free, appropriate public education to my child. So that is building an effective IEP.
It looks like we do have a question. Who do we contact if we feel our caseworker is not providing the help we need or answers to the questions we have? And what is an acceptable wait time when waiting for help or a response from our caseworker?
So can you clarify for me, when you say caseworker, are you talking about the case manager, the one who's kind of in charge of writing the IEP, your contact person at school? Yes. Okay. So typically there's a hierarchy at every school, and what I would do is probably copy the principal on communication. So I would definitely give opportunity for that case manager to respond. But if that case manager is not responding in a timely manner, I would follow up again with another email. I would definitely do it in writing and not just phone calls. And I would kind of list out, I contacted you on this date. I had questions about this. I still haven't heard from you. You know, I need a response, or when can I expect a response? And I would copy the principal on that. And then if you're still not getting a response, I would call an IEP meeting. You may have to ask at your building level, who is the department chair of that building, or who is that next person up. But if your case manager is not responding to your questions or what your child needs, then definitely I would call an IEP meeting and get other people involved to find out what that issue is. Maybe there's a challenge with that communication and we need to figure that out. So, and what is an acceptable wait time? I would say no longer than a week, and in some instances shorter than that. So, but definitely no longer than a week. So if I contacted my case manager on Monday, I would expect an answer by the following Monday. But depending on the situation, maybe just 3 days. So.
We have one more question. When would there be a time when the district refuses services that can't be provided per request? The case example would be, can the parents sue a school district over services that the districts can't provide?
Okay, so yes, a parent can sue a school district over the services that the district cannot provide if not providing, and may prevail, and I'm not a lawyer, so I would definitely, if I would definitely defer to a lawyer on this, may prevail in that due process if the parent can show that that service was necessary in order to provide that free, appropriate public education. When you say a district can't provide a service, I would want to know more information about why the district says they can't provide that service. Is it a practice that they don't provide that service? Because really there's nothing in IDEA that limits what a district can or cannot provide. It all hinges on what is necessary in order for that child to progress in the general education curriculum. You know, I'm trying to think of a service that a district might say they can't provide. Transportation from the day. Oh, here's a situation. Transportation from a daycare center that's outside of the school district's boundaries. They might say they can't do that. They can't provide transportation outside of that district's boundaries. They can. Whether or not they're required to is a different story. And actually, I had that situation, and usually there's some sort of solution that can be worked out. So if the district, and there's usually some sort of situation that can be worked out. So what happened in that situation is the parent provided the transportation, but the district reimbursed the parent for that transportation that was within their boundaries. So from where the parent lived to the school, rather than from the daycare, which was outside of the district boundaries. So there's usually a solution in there somewhere.
Okay, that's it for our questions. Thank you so much for all the information you gave us tonight. And we appreciate it so much. Thank you, Karen.
All right, thank you.
All right, have a good night, everyone.